The tampon king gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps. I wonder, is our strength our diversity?
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We
But I'm thinking there's only one explanation for Tim spewing nonsense like this. Time of the month.
What happens when a sharp-tongued TV host crosses paths with a governor who, in the eyes of some viewers, seems completely out of step? You get Greg Gutfeld taking Tim Walz apart in a way that online chatter has compared to a cardboard cutout getting thrown into a storm. From policy criticism to clumsy-looking political theater, Gutfeld turns Minnesota leadership complaints into a joke-filled takedown that feels less like a debate and more like a wrecking ball rolling through the set. Don't look away. The roast lands with a cold, biting edge, and every beat pushes harder than the last, especially as critics keep pointing to Walz's shaky public reception and the messy optics surrounding it.
Tim Walz continues to be criticized for embellishing his rank in service. After it came out over the weekend, he once claimed to be an official bikini inspector. Walz's direct superior in the National Guard says Walz knew his unit was about to deploy to Iraq and went behind the back of his superior officer to resign. When reached for comment, Walz yelled, "Hey, look over there," and then ran away. Although Walz's actions look bad to veterans, Dems say these revelations could really help him win the coward vote.
Oh, Tim Walz. If political leadership were a buffet, some critics would compare him to the lukewarm mashed potatoes nobody asked for. Bland, unnecessary, and somehow still left sitting there getting colder. And then Greg Gutfeld steps in with sarcasm flying, cutting through Walz's public missteps with the energy of a comedian who just will not let up. Online chatter has framed this as less like serious governing and more like performance art, and not in the flattering sense. Think finger painting with spoiled mayonnaise, messy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. The whole moment lands like a sharp, no-nonsense takedown, with every joke pushing the awkward optics even further.
Actually exploited his military background to cover up his crime. He said it was related to his service and that he actually wasn't drunk. He just misheard the instructions in the drunk test. He blew a super high level. It was like, 0.2, driving 100 miles an hour. And then when he's running for office, he said he wasn't drunk. I mean, this guy has creep written all over it. He created a snitch line, but lies about his personal infractions. He doesn't even own up to it. This is a guy who pushes a hoax about a sex on a couch. And then the closer you look at him,
Tim Walz running Minnesota, according to some critics, can feel like watching a substitute teacher trying to keep order in a classroom full of overly energetic raccoons. He comes across, at least in online commentary, like someone who skimmed the first few pages of Leadership for Beginners and treated that as the full plan. And if the goal was to turn the land of 10,000 lakes into a constant headache, some viewers would say the execution was strangely precise. And that is exactly why the reaction keeps spreading online, because the critique is not just about one awkward moment, it is about the image it leaves behind. When viewers already feel a leader is struggling to connect, even a little sarcasm can hit like a spotlight turning brighter. That is what makes Gutfeld's comments land so hard in the conversation. They tap into a bigger frustration that critics say has been building for a while. So the clip keeps getting pulled apart, replayed, and argued over, with some people treating it like comedy and others reading it as a sharper reflection of how shaky the public mood has become. In that kind of atmosphere, every joke feels loaded, every pause gets analyzed, and the whole exchange starts to look bigger than the moment itself.
saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote? How so? Math problems? But it's further proof that the most dangerous thing for a leftist is a follow-up question, which is why you never hear any. But I guess questioning elections is okay now. But the best moment came when Walz forgot who he is.
Before moving on, I should say I am Alex from the channel you are watching, East Unfiltered. Google recently disabled my YouTube AdSense, which means I am no longer able to earn from these videos or put as much into improving the content. If you want to help out, you can support me on Patreon so I can keep building better videos for you. And let's keep going. Greg Gutfeld did not even seem to break a sweat.
In online commentary, roasting Tim Walz was compared to dunking on someone who showed up to a job interview in Crocs and with their eyes covered.
Walz, at least in that moment, came across like he arrived on the debate stage with a kazoo and a whiteboard that only said feelings. Some viewers felt he almost invited the backlash, like he was serving Gutfeld a roast platter marked extra crispy and leaning in as if to say, "Go ahead, I insist." Walz came off like he brought glitter glue and a participation ribbon, while Gutfeld showed up with the kind of sharp punchline energy that can light up a whole segment.
Walz is a strange.
Oh, he's strange.
He is strange. Him and I are the same age. How does he look so much younger?
No, he's a strange guy. You know, he called up years ago. I was in the White House, and he said, "My house is being surrounded by people with American flags." I said, "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He said, "I think they're going to attack me." This was during the riots and everything else. They were MAGA people. You know, they like the American flag, all right? And they also had Trump. And I said, "How do you know?" There were about 15,000, he said. He said, "Could you put out a word like that? I'm your friend." I don't even know him, but that's the only time I ever spoke to him. And if you look back long ago, or tweets, before Truth, tweets, long ago, I put out a statement. He's a good man, the governor. He's on our side. I didn't know him, but I didn't want him to get hurt. And everybody put down their flags and they left. He said it was America.
This one is getting extreme. Now, starting with the economy, Walz looked straight at inflation, rising unemployment, and businesses that critics say are leaving the state. And somehow, the answer seemed to be more taxes. Tax the air, tax the smiles, maybe even tax the idea of moving to South Dakota. According to online commentary, companies are leaving Minnesota like it is a haunted house built out of climate mandates and endless social justice slides. Gutfeld ripped through Walz's economic troubles with the kind of sharp sarcasm that had viewers saying it was like watching a raccoon tear into a compost bin, only louder and messier. Some even joked, "How do you make California look like a capitalist paradise by comparison?"
Because under Walz, critics claim the only things really growing are government paperwork and the stress hitting the middle class.
Then it shifts to crime, where Walz's public safety approach, in the eyes of some commentators, lands like a toddler playing with a book of matches, overconfident, out of depth, and likely to end with sirens in the background. The supposed strategy seems to be blame society, hold hands, and hope offenders are somehow moved by interpretive dance. It is the equivalent of passing out scented candles in the middle of a burning building.
On the same bad cocaine, but Kamala can't speak, he can't speak, Biden was so high he couldn't remember anything. Like, this is literally the dumbest administration of all time. Why is he talking?
It really is the ultimate clown show, and I said this in the pod. He's a clown without a circus. He's
Doesn't even need makeup.
He's roaming the terrain. Is there some carnival that I can work for? Watch your windows.
He's a rogue clown.
Yes.
Who is just an inconsequential footnote to vice presidential history.
Yeah.
No one will remember his name on trivia night, and that's going to be in 3 months.
Gutfeld turned the crime discussion into punchlines without missing a beat, and online commentary said he made it sound like Minnesota was carrying a giant map labeled, "Here be carjackings across the Twin Cities." He even compared Walz's public safety approach to a mall security guard trying to stop a full-blown disturbance with nothing but a kazoo and a clipboard. And if Walz were in charge of national security, some critics joked that the country would be speed-running Russian language lessons by next Thursday. Then the conversation shifted to education, and that part got described online as a glittering dumpster fire. Walz, who once worked as a teacher, was portrayed in the chatter as pushing classrooms toward trendy word salad, instead of focusing on basics like math and science.
According to those reactions, students were being judged more on spotting microaggressions and building safe spaces out of popsicle sticks, while Gutfeld leaned into the joke that the only skill being rewarded was learning how to be offended on command. In that framing, schools looked less like places of learning and more like stages for awkward performance art, and detention was said to have been replaced by participation trophies and TikTok-style therapy sessions. And that is why the clip keeps hanging around online, because it does more than land a few jokes. It gives critics a way to connect those jokes to a much bigger debate about leadership, image, and public trust. Once that kind of framing takes hold, every line gets read twice, and every reaction starts to feel like part of a larger political mood. What makes the moment stick is not just the punchlines. It is the way people online say they can see their own frustrations reflected in the exchange. Some viewers treat it like pure entertainment, while others say it points to deeper doubts about whether Walz is connecting with voters in the way he needs to. That split is exactly what keeps the conversation moving, because the more people argue over the meaning, the longer the clip stays alive. So the commentary keeps snowballing, with each replay adding a little more pressure and each new reaction making the whole thing feel even bigger. In that kind of environment, Gutfeld is not just mocking a politician. He is becoming part of a wider story about how harsh, fast, and unforgiving public opinion can get when a leader is already under scrutiny.
I'm especially talking about these old white guys who seem to disappoint us on a regular basis in this country.
Dude, you're an old white guy. And you're right, you are a huge disappointment. I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correctly. Because Walz saying old white men suck isn't a political stance, it's his confession. Walz calling people old and white is like Maxine Waters making fun of someone for shopping at Wigs R Us. He wants to execute more DEI policies, and Trump wants to execute murderous gang members. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Can you see the difference?
Then the discussion turned to COVID policies, and that is where the online criticism really sharpened. Walz was portrayed by commentators as treating the pandemic like a personal test run for heavy-handed control, shutting things down, putting bar owners in legal trouble, fining churches over gatherings, and yet making room for street protests that were, in some circles, treated as essential. According to that chatter, the virus seemed to come with a political filter.
Gutfeld leaned into the hypocrisy angle, joking that Walz supposedly crushed Grandma's bingo night, but left the streets wide open for demonstrations, so long as there was a chant and a papier-mâché prop in the mix.
In that framing, it did not sound like public health, it sounded like a performance. Then the budget surplus entered the picture. Minnesota was sitting on a massive pile of extra cash, big enough that even Walz could not exactly dismiss it. But instead of sending that money back to the taxpayers who helped generate it, critics said it got spent like monopoly money at a government yard sale. More bureaucracy, more consultants, and maybe even, as the jokes went, a taxpayer-funded mural of himself staring thoughtfully into the distance.
As that Walz lost, but one of them, Politico says, is like Walz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is wide eye. That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that? Sorry, we're still. That was.
Gutfeld was almost laughing at the irony. He pointed out that, in the eyes of critics, Walz treating a budget surplus like that is a bit like handing a toddler a credit card and hoping they only buy the essentials. Sure, Tim, because the Department of Overregulation somehow needed a shiny espresso machine and an executive yoga retreat, all wrapped in the language of equity and innovation. According to that commentary, Walz has turned red tape into a full-contact competition. In Minnesota, some viewers joke that you cannot even run a lemonade stand without 14 permits, a background check, and a pronoun declaration notarized in triplicate.
It is being framed online as old-school, heavy-handed governance with a sleeker label, and critics say, even worse results.
Gutfeld leaned into that image hard. He painted Walz as twisting through policy like someone trying out for bureaucratic gymnastics, with every move looking more awkward and more baffling than the last. And then there is his unusual admiration for Gavin Newsom. In online chatter, Walz comes off like a starstruck fan, almost eager to turn Minneapolis into San Francisco's colder, clumsier, less glamorous cousin.
Tim Walz vomits more nonsense.
I called Donald Trump a wannabe dictator. It's because he is. It's because he is. Maybe it's a dope like Donald Trump. You bully the out of him. This is a cool man that takes it out and punches down on people.
Wow. Jamie.
What a douchebag, Greg. That was absolutely painful. He was the keynote speaker at this conference. Can you imagine having to watch more of that?
He looks at Gavin Newsom burning through California, at least in the way critics online describe it, and seems to think, perfect. Now let me add a little frostbite and subtract a few jobs. It is basically the same West Coast disaster script, just played in snow boots, with higher taxes and fewer chances for the people caught in the middle. Gutfeld went hard on the comparison, saying that if Gavin Newsom is like a shampoo commercial with the ego of a Bond villain, then Tim Walz is the understudy who wandered onto the wrong stage halfway through the show and started improvising in Pig Latin. Walz is framed in that chatter as strutting around like the confused mix of Bernie Sanders and a malfunctioning traffic light, presenting himself as a progressive savior while stumbling through every agency he touches. And transportation? That is where the criticism really piled up.
He pitched a multi-million-dollar bullet train idea that, according to the jokes, might be ready around the time dinosaurs make a comeback.
Meanwhile, Minnesota's roads are being described online like a post-apocalyptic obstacle course, with drivers just hoping their suspension survives the commute. But Walz, in that same commentary, is said to be too busy selling fantasy rail projects and auditioning for a Hogwarts Express-style policy rollout, while the real infrastructure keeps breaking down like gluten-free toast left out in the rain. And that is why the reaction keeps spreading, because once a clip gets tied to bigger questions about governance, it stops being just a joke and starts turning into a symbol.
People online are not only reacting to the punchlines, they are using them to argue about whether this kind of leadership looks effective, performative, or just plain out of touch.
That is the part that gives the conversation staying power. The criticism also gets sharper when viewers start connecting the jokes to everyday frustrations, like taxes, services, and whether public money is being handled in a way people can actually feel. In that kind of discussion, even a comedy segment can start sounding like a referendum on the whole political image around Walz. Some viewers see exaggeration, others see a pattern, and that split keeps the debate moving. So the clip keeps bouncing around because it sits right at the intersection of comedy and political frustration. Gutfeld is not just throwing out lines for laughs. He is tapping into a mood that a lot of online commentators say was already there. And once that mood takes hold, every new reaction makes the segment feel less like a passing joke and more like part of a much wider critique.
So the tone of the media was one of sadness, not reporting Walz's loss, but mourning it. Now, the truth is that a VP debate is like a colonoscopy. It's important and necessary, but that doesn't mean you want to watch it.
Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Even a deer in the headlights is screaming, "Get the out of the way, dude!" It's no wonder they don't do follow-up questions with Democrats. They're like the top layer of day old skimpy bean dip. What's underneath you don't want to see.
Gutfeld rolled his eyes so hard they practically made the internet shake. The sarcasm was so thick, it could have had its own zip code. The message, in that commentary, was basically this: brilliant strategy, Tim. Throw common sense straight into the trash and pour billions into rail fantasy. Because nothing screams fiscal genius like a bullet train that some critics said sounded slower than a DMV line and about as useful as a solar-powered flashlight in a Minnesota winter. Then the discussion shifted to Walz's media appearances.
Picture a man trying to play the role of a confident leader while sounding about as clear as a dial-up modem underwater.
He talks in long, looping circles, like a GPS stuck on recalculating. while critics imagined aides off to the side waving flashcards and hoping he lands one clean sentence. Gutfeld tore through those clips without much mercy. Watching Walz explain policy, in that framing, is like seeing a raccoon try to send Morse code while wearing oven mitts. Chaotic, confusing, and somehow still fully convinced the performance is working. It is not just awkward to watch, it comes across like verbal gymnastics nobody asked to buy a ticket for.
Meanwhile, Kamala's VP, Tim Walz, is being accused of lying about his rank, which is called stolen valor. But in Walz's defense, in Minneapolis, stealing is legal. But misrepresenting your past for political gain? I don't see that as a problem, said one woman.
When the heat goes up, Tim Walz, in this online commentary, does not just change direction, he spins into a full theatrical routine, like a ballerina fueled by too much caffeine and a lifetime of policy magazines. Ask him about concerns over crime in Minnesota, and the answer, according to critics, can veer straight into a speech about bike lanes magically solving everything. Raise the economy, and the conversation somehow slides into gender-neutral parking lots and a long, polished rant about the emotional burden of asphalt planning. That is how some viewers frame it, not as plain leadership, but as performance art dressed up as policy, with earnest TED Talk energy and slide decks promising to heal communities through ukulele circles. Gutfeld mocked that image with a pretty sharp edge.
In that framing, Walz comes off like a magic 8-ball in orthopedic shoes, shaken up only to spit out a cloud of jargon about intersectional frameworks and equity gardening.
Then there is the whole branding issue. Walz likes to present himself as a down-to-earth farm dad, but critics online joke that his idea of roughing it is sipping almond milk without a paper straw. He is also the kind of figure, in that same chatter, who might show up at a tailgate carrying kombucha and asking whether the brisket was sourced locally and ethically. Gutfeld leaned hard into that image, painting Walz as about as naturally folksy as a block of tofu at a monster truck rally. And nothing says working-class champion to those critics quite like casually quoting Noam Chomsky while wearing a fleece vest.
Video of the day, and he's got a very weird way of greeting his wife of 30 years. Roll it. I want to see this in slow motion. You'll see Walz extends his hand to his wife. She grabs it, they shake, he pulls her close, and then goes in for that non-friction hug, all the while still shaking her hand. I wish there was a word to describe that. Oh yeah, weird. I've seen warmer embraces between Chris Christie and a salad.
Minnesota's rural communities have been calling for real leadership. People who understand tractors, honest work, and maybe even a church potluck or two. Instead, some critics online say they get Tim Walz, a man who seems to act like Greater Minnesota, starts at the edge of a bike lane and ends the moment the kombucha tap runs dry. That is not what many viewers would call leadership. It looks more like lifestyle branding packed with buzzwords. He governs, in that criticism, as if he is live streaming a TED Talk called Empathy Through Bureaucracy. Gutfeld's punchline hit like a clean strike when he dubbed Walz the IKEA governor. It arrives in a flat box, half the screws are missing, assembly is left to everyone else, and by the time it is put together, you are staring at something wobbly and unstable, wondering if you just built a metaphor for the whole administration. And in that same commentary, the comparison was not far off. Walz treats policy like a Pinterest mood board, as if governing were just hashtags, oat milk, and scheduled interpretive dance.
Gutfeld cut through every layer with sharp precision, from the bloated spending bills to the long-winded speeches, and the sanctimonious sermon style that critics say gets dressed up as leadership.
And that is exactly why the clip keeps getting traction, because the jokes are landing on top of a much bigger political argument. Once people start using comedy as shorthand for their frustration, the conversation stops being about one roast and starts feeling like a broader verdict on how leadership is being sold to the public. Some viewers treat it as a simple punchline, while others see it as a sharper sign that the image being projected does not match what they expect from an actual governor. That divide is what keeps the discussion moving. Online, critics are not just repeating the same jokes. They are connecting the segment to the way Walz is perceived in interviews, public appearances, and policy talk. Supporters, of course, push back on that framing, but the back and forth only gives the moment more life.
Every reaction adds another layer, and suddenly the clip becomes less about a single monologue and more about a running debate over style, substance, and whether the performance feels convincing.
That is also where Gutfeld's angle gets more pointed, because the humor is not floating in a vacuum. It is being tied to a larger sense of political fatigue, the kind where viewers say they are tired of polished language that does not seem to answer basic concerns. So when the commentary keeps mocking the presentation, it is really tapping into that bigger mood, the one where sarcasm works because people already think the whole image is under strain. And that is why the reaction does not fade quickly. It keeps circling back as part of the same unresolved conversation. He picked apart every point with sarcasm sharp enough to cut clean through steel, turning Walz's oatmeal-flavored brand of governance into what critics online saw as a pile of soggy, lukewarm mediocrity. The sharpest part, according to that commentary, was the suggestion that Walz might have walked away thinking it was praise. Minnesota, in that framing, deserves far better than a glorified group project in khakis. And Gutfeld, with punchlines sharper than a freshly sharpened DMV pencil, drove home the image of a governor in a fleece vest and a passive-aggressive grin, sounding like someone trying to follow expired IKEA instructions, confused, underwhelming, and still missing half the screws. If this roast of Walz hit you as hard as it did online, like, subscribe, share, and comment your take, then see you on the next one.